Hey guys, I'm Abby Sharp. Welcome to Abby's Kitchen. And today we are going to the movies. Now, when I heard that another vegan Netflix documentary had surfaced, I immediately kind of rolled my eyes and thought it would be just like What the Health. But after hearing a ton of really positive reviews and having a lot of people directly ask me to review it, I knew it was really time that I had to give it a watch. Now, before I get started reviewing the movie, I want to start off by saying I was actually pleasantly surprised with the film, and overall, I think it was really well done. While I'm not personally vegan, I do think the research is very clear that we can all benefit from incorporating more plants into our diet. Having said that, it's not a perfect documentary, so I'm going to talk a little bit about both sides. Now, before I get started, I want to give my general disclosure that the information you're about to see is for education and entertainment purposes only, and you should always seek advice from a healthcare team for your unique case. Now, if you haven't watched the documentary, here's a little overview on Game Changers. Game Changers is a vegan documentary that was released in late 2019. It follows James Wilkes, who's a UFC fighter and a military combat fighting trainer. A few years ago, James experienced a terrible knee injury that led him to having to take off many months from fighting to recover. After reviewing hundreds of research studies during this time off, James stumbled upon a study about the gladiator cemetery, in which a total of 22 gladiator skeletons were analyzed. Side note, the movie does say there were 68 skeletons, 31 of which were non-gladiators, but I digress. Now, what the researchers found was that these men had tremendous bone mineral density and strength. After analyzing their bones, the researchers found that these men had really high levels of strontium, suggesting that they ate a primarily plant-based diet. Note that the authors did say that the gladiators were not vegan and did consume some animal products, but that they ate mainly plants. This is apparently the study that inspired James to turn to a vegan diet in an effort to speed up his healing and improve his overall health. So Game Changers follows James's journey to healing and also checks in on other stories of other athletes who follow a purely plant-based diet. So now that you have a rough idea on Game Changers, we're going to do this in two parts, starting with what I liked about this video. So stay tuned to catch part 2 when I'll be unpacking what I didn't like so much. So first, let's talk about some of the claims in the video that were true. Number 1, that plant-based diets are good for your health. Now, we know from ample research, and I'll leave some links in the description below, that plant-based diets definitely improve heart health, decrease the risk of mortality, and lower the risk of other diseases. For example, adherence to a plant-based diet is linked to a 19% and 11% lower risk of cardiovascular disease mortality and all-cause mortality, respectively. It's also linked to a high intake of nutrients like vitamins A and C, folate, potassium, iron, and polyunsaturated fats. A really great 2018 study showed that people following a low-carb diet had an 18% higher risk of death if they replaced their carbs with animal fats and proteins, while those that replaced their carbs with plant fats and proteins saw an 18% decrease in the risk of death. So this really drives in the importance of the source of protein, fat, and carbs that we're getting in the diet. And just like the documentary talks about, the research is pretty clear that incorporating more plants into our diet has tremendously positive effects on our overall health. Another claim that they make in defense of a plant-based diet is that we cannot produce vitamin C. So the documentary looks kind of at our Paleolithic ancestors and determines that plant foods were actually more important than we may have realized. One of the quotes that stood out to me, and I think may be surprising to people, is that we have longer digestive tracts than carnivores, and this allows humans to digest plants and fibers that require longer processing time. We also lack the ability to produce our own vitamin C. So this indicates how reliant upon plants we actually are. So this little factoid is actually quite true. During the time of caveman, these people were not as lucky as us to have an abundance of different types of foods at their disposal. So they ate whatever, whenever that food was available. Sometimes that may have meant eating just plants for a long period of time, and other times, when the hunting was really good, it was meat for days before it spoiled. Now, as James mentions, humans do have different digestive tracts than other mammals, and I'll touch more about that later. But compared to strict carnivores, we have a much better ability to digest carbohydrates and plant-based materials. This is due to many reasons, but one example is that humans have higher levels of glucose transporters, and as a result, typically consume a much higher carbohydrate to protein ratio compared to meat-eating carnivores. James also touches on the importance of vitamin C as a marker of our ancestral diet history, since vitamin C comes from plants. He's totally right that plants are an excellent source of vitamin C, and that we can't produce our own vitamin vitamin C. He's also right that we are highly dependent on plants to get these nutrients. Although, to be fair, I would hope there are very few non-vegans that could deny this fact. Maybe some of our carnivore friends. But vitamin C is important for so many functions like collagen synthesis, non-heme iron absorption, and supporting the immune system. So yeah, James, you are totally right. We need to be eating vitamin C-rich foods. Whether or not a non-vegan can't get enough vitamin C is not something I would definitely agree with, but I'll get to my criticism later. The other thing that I feel well aligned with, whether you're vegan or not, is that a lot of us could probably benefit from a B12 supplement. So what James is talking about in this scene is that the one thing that didn't fit with this idea that our bodies are not built for an animal-based diet is B12. And that he's always been told that B12 comes solely from animal products. But what he's uncovered is that B12 isn't actually made by the animals, it's made by bacteria that the animals consume in their soil and water. So just like with protein, animals are kind of like the middlemen. And he states that before industrial farming, farm animals and humans could get B12 from eating bits of dirt on plant foods or by drinking water. But now, because of pesticides, antibiotics, and chlorine, etc., it kills the bacteria. And for that reason, even farm animals have to be given B12 supplements. And then he states a research study that found that 39% of people who were tested, including meat eaters, were low in B12. James's bottom line in all this is that a lot of us, whether or not we eat animal foods, could probably benefit from taking a B12 supplement. Now for this claim, I have both positive and negative things to say, but to keep things organized, I'll just say them both here and then we can debunk bigger issues in my critique video. But let's start with the positive. So James is definitely right that most people can adequately thrive off of a plant-based diet because our body is able to produce necessary vitamins and minerals, or we're able to get them through plant-based foods. It's also true that vitamin B12 is really the only exception, as our body just does not produce high amounts of it, and there are really no good plant-based sources, except maybe nutritional yeast. B12, however, is crucial to our health for so many reasons. It helps make DNA, supports our metabolism, keeps our nervous system functioning, increases blood cell development, and so much more. Now, most people get vitamin B12 through animal sources, through supplements, or B12 injections. And we don't usually recommend supplements or injections unless there's still a deficiency with eating food sources of B12, or if a person follows a predominantly plant-based diet. So food sources of vitamin B12 include things like fish, eggs, cheese, beef, pork, chicken, milk, and other dairy products. And again, the only plant-based source of B12 is nutritional yeast. You can also get vitamin B12 from fortified cereals and grains, so that is also a really great option for people who are avoiding animal products. Now, while B12 deficiency is common, it's probably less so than what they list in this film. From the data that I've looked at, it's closer to about 15%, although it does definitely depend on the population you're analyzing. Those who are at an increased risk of deficiency include the elderly, those with malabsorption issues like Crohn's disease or celiac disease, people with pernicious anemia, and of course, vegetarians and vegans. Now, James is also correct to suggest that B12 is produced by bacteria, but here is where he's wrong. B12 is produced by bacteria and then accumulates in animal tissues. However, that doesn't mean that animals being the middleman is necessarily a bad thing. For example, cows have a 4-chambered stomach that contain B12 synthesizing bacteria. Essentially, these bacteria produce B12 in the cow's stomach, and then this is absorbed and stored in the liver, muscles, or is secreted into their milk. James says that the best way to get B12 is through supplements, and I would have to disagree. In a recent 2019 review in the Frontiers of Nutrition, researchers concluded that milk was associated with the highest levels of B12, followed by animal meats and cheeses. They also noted that those who consumed a vegan or plant-based diet had much lower levels of B12 compared to omnivores. In fact, most omnivores had sufficient levels. Again, not everyone who follows an omnivore diet has adequate levels of B12, and in that case, a supplement is definitely required. But if you follow a vegan or vegetarian diet, I would definitely suggest getting your levels tested regularly and speaking to your doctor about a good B12 supplement. I'm gonna leave one of my favorites in the link below so you can check that out as well. Okay, so now let's dive into some other things that I really loved about this film. Number one, dispelling a long history of gender stereotypes. So the film points out a very long history in marketing that's associated manliness or manhood with meat. But one of my favorite parts of this film is the genuine effort to dispel all the irrational gender stereotypes surrounding what we eat. For decades, we have seen commercials that promote meat as the ultimate fuel for men and salads for women. In order to be a man, you need to eat meat. In order to be a good woman, you need to eat salad. This gendering of foods is truly damaging to our health and well-being. So I feel like Game Changers does a fantastic job with convincing its viewers that men can still be manly and follow a plant-based diet. They show tons and tons of clips throughout the movie of strong, muscly men that claim to eat a vegan diet. From a world record-holding strongman to a heavyweight boxer, this documentary does a really great job at debunking the theory that in order to be strong, you have to eat meat. They also highlight another sexualized taboo topic: men's sexual performance. Okay, so here we see Dr. Aaron Spitz, author of the Penis Book, do an experiment on 3 young men. Essentially, the 3 men were fed animal-based burritos one night and then a plant-based burrito the second night. Both nights, the men were connected to monitors that tested the intensity and length of erections that naturally would occur over the night. They found that the plant-based burritos led to upwards of a 13.54% increase in penis girth during the erection, and up to 477% increase in erection minutes. Granted, this is not a scientifically validated study, and fortunately the doctor mentions this, but it really does convince these 3 guys that plant-based foods are not going to somehow take away their manhood. Finally, on the topic of gender stereotypes, they drive in the fact that plant-based soy proteins like tofu will not increase estrogen levels. And they do a really great job at explaining the science behind this as well. We know from research that the consumption of soy proteins does not alter men's testosterone levels. This was shown in a robust 2010 meta-analysis, as well as a recent 2017 study in 47 college men, in which there was no major differences in testosterone or estrogen levels after consuming whey protein, soy protein, or a placebo. So kudos to this. Another thing that I really liked about this documentary was there was less fear-mongering and more science. Unlike in What the Health, this documentary limited its biased fear-mongering and really just laid down the research. I mean, yes, there were still some occasional out-there claims, such as the connection between tobacco and meat, and the experiments were definitely not always high quality or reliable, but I didn't feel threatened by the end of it the same way I did after watching other shockumentaries. One of the biggest problems with documentaries is their reliance on attention-grabbing claims. It's really, really boring to listen to a person say, "Eat in moderation." So a lot of producers cherry-pick data to get people talking. Am I happy with all of the research that they used? No, definitely not. But we will get to that momentarily. Another thing that I liked was the transparency in research. One issue with documentaries is their true lack of transparency. They'll take a study, make their own conclusions, and very rarely will they actually share which research study they're talking about. But Game Changers actually does a really good job listing each research study that they used, and even went so far as to show us visuals from the research study, which included their names, their journals, and authors. In my opinion, the more transparency, the less there is to hide, and it really helps a critical thinker like me buy into some of their points. Another thing that I actually appreciated about this film was their moderate approach to transitioning to a plant-based diet. Sometimes it's hard to watch these shockumentaries because they always tend to be really extreme and pushy. Coming from experience, I believe it's hard to convince someone to change their lifestyle that they become accustomed to their entire life. So telling someone to just go eat vegan honestly doesn't really help. So for example, one of the athletes in the film said something like, people have this idea in their head that if they're gonna do something, it's an all or nothing approach, and that's not the case at all. And she's right. An all or nothing approach is very hard for people. If you just straight up tell somebody, hey, you need to stop eating meat and dairy products today, when they actually really like to eat meat and dairy products, and that's something that they've always had, you might lose them almost immediately. Instead, the documentary really emphasizes the importance of a vegan diet, but also brings to light the benefits of just making small changes over time. Arnold said it best, hey, why don't you just try once a week? Just chill it with the meat. This type of balanced, reasonable approach is something that I also recommend to people. You don't have to get rid of all the animals to make a difference. Slowly transitioning to more plants will tend to just crowd out some of the animal products in your diet. So if all or nothing doesn't work for you, as it doesn't always work for me, some is really a great place to start. But alas, when I did some real digging, I uncovered a few problematic claims and tactics. Number one was the comparison of a peanut butter sandwich to beef or eggs in terms of protein quality and quantity. It just doesn't perfectly hold up. So in one of the scenes, they talk about how 1 cup of cooked lentils or a peanut butter sandwich has as much protein as a 3-ounce serving of beef or 3 large eggs. And then they talk about the quality of the protein. They state that proteins are strings of amino acids, and there's some amino acids that our bodies can't make. True. Those are the essential amino acids, so we have to get them from food. And one of the arguments about animal-based proteins being superior is that plant-based proteins are not complete. So you're not going to get all of those essential amino acids. But that is a fallacy as well. Now, I love peanut butter and I eat it several times a week, but let's take a look at how some of these stack up. Now, 1 large egg has 6 grams of protein, so that there's 18 grams of protein in 3 eggs. A 3-ounce steak has around 17 to 21 grams of protein. If we assume that a peanut butter sandwich has 2 pieces of bread and 2 tablespoons of natural peanut butter, then 2 pieces of bread has around 8 grams of protein, and 2 tablespoons of natural peanut butter has around 9 grams of protein, for a total of 17 grams of protein in the sandwich. So yes, it is around the same amount as eggs and a little bit less than steak. Here's the thing though, this peanut butter sandwich has around 370 calories. The steak has around 113 calories, and the eggs have about 215. Although having a peanut butter sandwich is totally awesome, we can't ignore the fact that you have to have almost twice the amount of calories just to meet the protein needs through plants, at least for this example that they're given. So this is usually the case for a lot of plant-based proteins. For example, to get 20 grams of proteins from almonds, you'd need 2/3 of a cup, which equals about 542 calories. Again, not dissing plant-based proteins, love them, love almonds, but if we look at the protein on a gram per calorie basis, some options are more efficient than others. Another thing to keep in mind is that plant-based proteins tend to have lower bioavailability compared to animal proteins. What's more, they're not always a complete source of all essential amino acids, despite what Dr. Loomis says in the film. With that being said, you can totally get enough essential amino acids from plant-based foods. You just have to make sure that you're getting different sources of plants so that you cover all of your amino acid bases. Finally, in the instance of sports nutrition specifically, you probably wouldn't want to have a peanut butter sandwich after a hard workout because the fat will slow down the uptake of the protein. Ideally, we actually want lower fat meals with a combination of carbs and protein after a workout for this specific reason. Next is some of the flaws in the burrito centrifuge experiment. All right, so at first glance, this experiment is shocking and so interesting. Also, it makes me want a burrito like stat. However, let's really dive into this experiment. Now, first, to be clear, this is not a controlled study, and there are tons of flaws from the get-go. First of all, you have an NFL player that's been vegan for many years. Then you have NFL players that are adamant about their processed food. So right away, you don't have apples to apples comparison. What would be a better comparison is if you had a vegan, an omnivore that eats minimally processed food, and then another person who eats a lot of processed food. Even that would be rife with confounders, but still, it's at least a little bit more realistic. Also, we don't have an apples to apples comparison with the burritos. The vegan burrito uses black beans, which are high in carbs and protein, but very low in fat. The meat burritos are much higher in fat content. This is a problem because after eating the food, fats are packaged into chylomicrons and then enter into the blood. So yes, eating a high-fat meal, you're going to see higher amounts of fat accumulate into the blood. Furthermore, research shows that certain types of low-fat, lean animal products are linked with better endothelial function. So while this experiment is definitely eye-opening for people who eat a lot of high-fat processed food, it's not a good comparison for those who have a more whole food, balanced diet and who consume lean meats or poultry or seafood in moderation. Also, I just want to point out that it's really convenient that a lot of these documentaries denounce evidence or research that's being funded by animal or dairy industries, but then to turn around and to use evidence that has been sponsored by plant-based industries to support their claims. It's hypocritical to support one type of research over the other. We either accept it all as evidence or we leave it all on the floor. We cannot pick or choose. So for example, this experiment was inspired by a study that was funded by Xoxo Avocados that found that triglyceride levels did not increase when you added some avocado to a burger compared to just eating the burger as is. Also, just want to mention that that study had 11 subjects. Now, I love avocados, and I also think that research studies can be done very well even if they're sponsored. I don't have an issue with it as long as it's still really good research, which, I mean, 11 participants, not so much. But ultimately, it's only fair that if we're going to dismiss research study being funded by meat and dairy, we probably should not be using funded studies by plant-based industries as a rebuttal. Okay, so next thing I want to discuss and unpack is this claim that animals are jacked on plant-based proteins so that we ultimately should be too. Humans have different digestive systems than any other animal. Cows have a 4-chambered stomach, which allows them to properly digest grass and extract a higher amount of amino acids from the grass. Humans, on the other hand, do not have the ability to digest grass. Therefore, arguing that we should be able to build muscle off of plants using that as an example just doesn't really make sense to me. Also, we're not gorillas either. Gorillas have a larger colon than humans have, allowing them to break down plants significantly better. This is also why gorillas can digest a lot of stems and fibrous plants, but humans can't. Or at least we need to cook them down or pulverize them. Gorillas also eat upwards of 40 pounds of food per day. That would be a really big meal. So again, it's not an apples to apples comparison to think of us like other animals. I also want to touch on how the film consistently compares processed animal foods to whole plant foods. If you notice in the film, they seem to always compare super high fat, highly processed meats to whole unprocessed plant food. A good example is when they meet with the Miami Dolphin players and they talk about how much they love fried chicken and they don't ever plan to stop eating it. But fried chicken is literally dipped in a bath of fat to be cooked. So no, this is not going to be the healthiest choice to choose every single day. On the other hand, a chicken breast is quite low in fat and is a good source of quality protein. And then there's Arnold's diet. So Arnold talks about how he was eating 10 to 15 eggs a day and 250 grams of protein every single day. That's pretty extreme. And then he talks about how when he adopted a plant-based diet, his cholesterol levels went down. Yeah, obviously when you've cut out 15 eggs a day, I wouldn't expect or recommend anyone to be loading up on animal products like that. But what the film doesn't really adequately acknowledge was that super highly processed plant foods aren't really necessarily inherently healthy either. So, for example, in a 2017 research study of 73,710 women, researchers found that a whole food plant-based diet was linked to a 25% decreased risk in coronary heart disease. On the contrary, a processed plant-based diet led to a 32% increased risk of coronary heart disease. This just goes to show that the form the food comes in matters a lot, maybe even more so than whether or not it's plant-based. While I understand that they're of course trying to sell the idea that plant-based foods can taste delicious, they're also, maybe perhaps unknowingly, selling the idea that overly processed vegan foods are still really healthy choices just because they're vegan. Thanks to really good marketing, vegan foods, like gluten-free foods, tend to have a real health halo going on. But are copycat vegan Big Macs or vegan cookies really the best option to eat every single day? Personally, speaking just from a nutritional perspective, if this was the alternative, I would way rather see somebody have a chicken salad and a yogurt parfait. Bottom line, vegan doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. And then finally, there's the claim that milk lowers testosterone in men. So in the documentary, they bring up a particular study, and they suggest the findings were that drinking a cup of cow's milk can increase a male's estrogen level by 26% in just 1 hour, while dropping their testosterone levels by 18%. The research that they're quoting is absolutely good research. However, they definitely lose my trust when they start cherry picking the data. Problem is, this research study they looked at had 7 men, 6 prepubescent children, and 5 women. And even though that's already a really super small sample size, they only talk about the 7 men, making the sample size even smaller. So in those 7 men that were studied, estrogen secretion temporarily increased, while testosterone secretion temporarily decreased. What James fails to mention was that these levels only changed temporarily and peaked around 1 hour. After that, it just went back to normal. James words it a little bit differently by saying drinking a cup of cow's milk can increase a male's estrogen levels by 26% in 1 hour, while dropping their testosterone levels by 18%. So this suggests that in just an hour, it increases to that much with no mention of it ever going back down. Again, I'm not suggesting that these hormonal changes are a good thing, and it's totally your prerogative to eat whatever you feel comfortable with, but not discussing the full effect seems a little bit misleading. I do think we need more context. Okay, so now let's talk about some of my other grievances with the film and what I didn't love about it, generally speaking. Number one, the filmmakers had a clear vegan agenda, and I'm not so sure that that is always so well cited in a lot of these consumer entertainment films. Just like any type of documentary, Game Changers had a clear agenda to get you to follow a vegan diet. It would be the same for, any keto or paleo or any other documentary. But the people who make these documentaries are making them for a reason, and it's their job to make their case as compelling as possible. While I think that they navigated this pretty well, especially compared with some other shockumentaries out there, I think it would have been really a nice idea to emphasize their own personal bias. All of the people who spoke on the film were either predominantly or completely plant-based. So obviously there's gonna be a little bit of bias going on. Now, let's be clear. It's impossible to be completely Switzerland, even though I'm trying. But we all have our own unique experiences that really put a certain biased lens on us. However, it's really my opinion that taking the time to reflect on our biases can help us make sure that it doesn't affect our professional opinions. That's something that I have been trying to do here at Abby's Kitchen, and I think I would have trusted the content even more had I seen that happening. If they wanted to appear more unbiased, they really should have included both sides. But instead, they really only spoke to people who followed a plant-based diet or who advocated for a plant-based diet. Again, it's not as biased as I've seen in other documentaries, so I totally applaud that. But I still think it's something that they could have improved on and still made really, really strong points, if not stronger, because in my opinion, the science in itself is compelling enough. Let the science speak for itself. There were also quite a few conflicts of interest and biases that were not mentioned. So, like I said, the film had doctors, experts, and athletes that already follow a plant-based diet, so there is an inherent bias there. But furthermore, a lot of the people that they interviewed had unmentioned conflicts of interest, which I really don't love. So like James Cameron is of course the filmmaker of movies like Titanic and Avatar, but he's also the founder and CEO of Verdient Foods, which is a vegan pea protein company. Dr. Aaron Spitz, who's the author of the Penis book, which is also a plant-based book. Dr. Robert Vogel, who's the author of The Pritikin Edge, another plant-based book. Dr. James Loomis, owner of a plant-based meal planning service. Dr. Ornish, author of Undo It and seller of vegan retreats and online programs, etc., etc., etc. Also, when you use celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger to promote a lifestyle, they obviously will have a huge impact due to their celebrity card. So while these speakers are experienced and successful in their careers, they really should list their potential conflicts of interest if they're going to try to call out other professionals and researchers for theirs. Honestly, I understand why they'd want to interview and incorporate a wide range of kind of plant-based scholars and plant-based supporters. It makes total sense. I just like the transparency. Number three, there was definitely a lack of professional representation from my industry, the leaders in nutrition. So in the film, you see a number of plant-based doctors and athletes talking about plant-based eating, but that's about it. They don't interview dietitians who are the experts in nutrition. If you're going to talk about nutrition, you should probably always have a dietitian at the table. It's like talking about brain health and not having a neuroscientist or a neurologist. They're the experts. Unfortunately, there was only one registered dietitian in the film, and it was one that they conveniently cherry-picked from a CNN interview in which the dietitian advocates for meat consumption. So it's kind of disappointing that the only dietitian that they show is painted as a bit of a villain, when there is a lot, if not pretty much all dietitians that I'm aware of, are really big supporters of a predominantly plant-based diet. Taking a clip from just one dietitian and generalizing it for all dietitians is totally unfair and inaccurate. So while the dietitian is correct in saying that we can't establish a cause and effect relationship between meat and cancer. I think that I can speak for a lot of dietitians here when I say that we would all benefit from reducing our meat consumption and including more plant-based foods in our diet. I think we personally need to meet people where they are though, and that may mean making leaner choices or lower sodium choices or swapping out one meat meal a week with a plant-based protein, etc. I've been pretty clear on my personal belief that all foods can fit and that it really does not need to be an all or nothing approach. On a side note, I recently watched an interview with James in which he said that while they probably could have had more dietitians in the film, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is sponsored by the meat and dairy industry. Okay, so even though I'm Canadian and I'm part of a totally different professional body, I want to make something clear. We are not sponsored or controlled by any food industry. I've spoken about my own personal involvement in my sponsorship video here, and I agree that it's unfortunate that any food industry has been sponsoring conferences or events. I don't like that at all. But I also know that learning opportunities like conferences require money. And while I'm going way off course here, I will note that even at conferences I've been to where, let's say, a meat or dairy industry has signed on as a sponsor, I've never seen it impact the content or learning that tends to take place. And I've been to lots of great webinars and keynotes about the benefits of plant-based eating. So for the same reasons I don't like that doctors' conferences are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies, I get that it feels icky, but I also know that all of us dietitians are still really capable of evaluating the research and making balanced, realistic recommendations for our clients based on it. Okay, so issue number 4 was that I just felt there was too much of a reliance on personal anecdotes. Now, while personal stories are super helpful and give examples of the benefits of a plant-based diet, they aren't really science. Sure, the athletes say that they feel better, and they probably did, but we can't just use their experience as solid evidence. In fact, a lot of their claims regarding sports performance lack any concrete evidence or require way more actual real research before any conclusions can be made. Although I'm super happy that these people found success on a plant-based diet, there are also many, arguably even more successful athletes that follow an omnivorous diet. So highlighting that, hey, veganism and athleticism are not mutually exclusive experience is great and so important. It doesn't negate the idea that success as an athlete is also possible following an omnivore diet. And yet, because we don't see that experience or any solid research comparing these, we don't really see that or know that. If we become too reliant on personal anecdotes, then we're opening up a whole crazy can of worms where we can make any claim that we want regarding health and believe it's true. Could you imagine if someone said, I started eating 2 bags of gummy bears a day and I felt better, and decided that that was enough to promote a gummy bear diet? I know that it's an extreme example, but I see this stuff happening all the time, and it's like literally why I have a job. So on that note, I want to give my overall conclusion on Game Changers. I actually give this film a positive rating. I have tried to be super balanced and critical here, so I hope you can see that while I fully support plant-based diets, it doesn't mean I'm always for non-evidence-based ways of promoting them. Yes, I think their use of some of the research is faulty, but they do bring up a lot of really important points, and I also think it's kind of inspiring. It definitely helps dispel the myth that a vegan diet and athleticism are mutually exclusive. I also think, even for us non-athletes, it serves as a really good reminder that we would all benefit from a plant-based diet, even if that means just introducing more plants to our diet in general. Keep in mind that, nutrition science is extremely complicated. It's not black and white. If it was, we'd all be living into our hundreds. Trying to jam in nutrition science into an 1.5-hour documentary is nearly impossible. So I commend Game Changers for the effort that they made here. And while there are quite a few flaws in the film, like all films, their overall message of eating more plants is something that I can totally get on board with. So guys, I would love to know if you have watched Game Changers. What did you like? What did you think of it? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. Give this video the thumbs up if you liked my critical, balanced review, and I'll see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye!